Welcome. This is our fourth study in the series Loving God with All of Our Strength. And this series is part of a bigger series, Loving God with Our Heart, Soul, Mind, and Strength. Today's study is called Discovering Practice. What we've seen before is that loving God with all of our strength means to love Him not just because of what He gives us, but because of who He is. And if we love Him because of who He is, then we want to be like Him. And to be like Him means to love like He loves, loving unconditionally. So it turns out that to love God with all of our strength means to love our neighbor unconditionally. And that's precisely what John teaches us in 1 John chapter 4. You know, one of my most favorite activities is going hiking. I love to hike to the tops of mountains and view the majestic, powerful landscape. But I might not know really what I'm looking at the formations on the surface of the earth and how they come to be. But a long time ago, I went on a hike, one of my first hikes, with my best friend from high school, Doug. At the time, I was studying biology and science, but he was studying geology. And when we got to the top of the mountain where we were hiking in the desert of California, he began to use some language to point out formations that we were looking at, alluvial plain and tectonic uplift and folding. And then he began to point out what these words meant in terms of the vistas that we were seeing. It helped tremendously. And now, after that experience, I could go on other hikes and know what to look for, know what I was seeing when I was looking at these landscapes. Something similar happened a while back when I went on a hike, a night hike in a tropical forest in Costa Rica with a group of really good friends. One of them, Abel, is a professional guide. And Abel, because of his knowledge and his expertise, knew what to look for, where to find it. He knew what we were seeing when we went through the forest. We saw sloths in the trees, snakes, spiders, tarantulas, beautiful frogs, and even a butterfly that was grand and large and beautiful wings, but folded underneath a leaf. I would never have seen that. I would never have been looking for it, but Abel was, because he knew what to look for and where to find it. That's the difference a guide makes. And now maybe on future hikes, I'll know what to look for in tropical rainforests at night. You know, when the lost son came back and wanted to love like his father loved, he had to do something similar. In this sense, remember the parable of the lost son in Luke chapter 15, verse 11? If you want to stop the video and read that passage again, you're welcome to know it very well. But when the lost son came back, he now loved his father in a way that he had not loved him before. Before, he had loved his father because of what his father gave him. He had given him an inheritance, but he'd wasted it in this distant country. Now when he came back, he began to know what it meant to love his father for who he was, for the generous, loving, and kind person that he was. And since he loved his father for who he was, he would want to become like his father and love like his father loved him and his brother. How would he love his brother like his father loves? Well, his father would be his guide, because he himself, the younger son, had spent so much time in selfishness that selfishness had blinded him to know where to look for, where to find opportunities to discover practice, the practice of love. His father would have to be his guide. And he could observe what his father had been doing for him. He knew, for instance, that when he came back, when his father first saw him, his father made no mention of all the evil things he had done in that far country, of wasting all the money. He treated him, in fact, as if it had never happened. That's forgiveness. And when he came back, he must have been filthy dirty. He had been feeding pigs. And his father immediately covered his shame with a new robe and sandals on his feet. When he came back, he thought the most he deserved would be to be a son. But his father gave him more than he deserved. He thought that the most he could be when he came back would be a servant. And when he came back, his father made him more than a servant. He restored him as a son again. That's grace. Grace is a special form of mercy. Mercy that's given, relief that's given, even when it's not deserved. When he came back to, he discovered his father had been patiently waiting for him to return, not to correct him or chastise him for what he had done, but instead to embrace him, and he ran to embrace him. That's patience. And his father was ready to make everything easy for his son in return. His son must have thought how difficult it was to return home after he'd done so many evil things. And that distance he covered to return home must have been very difficult. But once he got home, his father made it easy for him to become a son again. That's kindness, to make the life of another person easy. And his father had run to him to reconcile himself to his son. That's peace. Those are the steps of a peacemaker, seeking to reconcile oneself to another person who is in conflict. Forgiveness, compassion, mercy, patience, kindness, peace. That's what he saw in his father. And maybe at the moment he didn't understand the meaning of these terms, but he knew what he saw. And he could later give meaning to these terms and identify what he saw using these terms of forgiveness and compassion and mercy. Now he could understand how to look for practice, the practice of love, with his brother. But it's not like he had to love his brother in precisely the same way that his father had loved him. He wouldn't have to give a big party for his brother and celebrate. He wouldn't have to give his brother a new set of clothes, for instance. That's what his father had done. But his relationship with his brother was different. He would be in the fields with his brother, working alongside of his brother. He would be feeding the animals together with his brother. He would be working in the fields with the servants. His brother might even treat him as if he were a servant and not his brother. So in that context, in the context of his relationship with his brother, how would he love? Well, he would take these same observations he'd made with his father and then look for the same things, the same kinds of moments to forgive, to show patience, to show mercy in his relationship with his brother. And there would be plenty. His brother surely would be ready to shame him or criticize him. And so he could forgive him and treat him as if it didn't happen. There would be moments where he could show compassion towards his brother. His brother was angry, but there's reasons sometimes why a person is angry. It may be because the person is angry with themselves, or they feel insecure, and they use their anger as a way of power. Well, he could show compassion for that because he knew that he too, in his selfishness, had not had compassion for people, and he just thought only of himself. So now he could have compassion for his brother and encourage his brother, uplift his brother unconditionally, not just to please his brother, but instead because he wanted to live in love and be loving like his father is loving. He could show mercy and grace in his dealings with his brother. He could do more work than he really was obligated to do. Instead of thinking about whether his brother deserved more work in the fields, he could give him more work, put in more time for the sake of grace and mercy. He could help his brother carry a load. And to be patient, he could refuse to pay back his brother's anger with anger. He could make his brother's life easier, kindness, by cooperating with his brother. And when they did have a conflict, he could be the first one to make peace. So he could take what he observed in his father and now discover practice with his brother. We have to do the same thing as disciples of Jesus when we read the teachings of Jesus. Jesus, in fact, is our guide to loving like our Father loves. And when we read his teachings and try to understand them, his parables, read about his conversations with people and the principles that he taught about loving our neighbor, we don't read them just to memorize them or just to say that we know them. We read them because we want to discover practice, and they are our guide. For instance, the expert in the law who first heard the parable of the Good Samaritan had to do this, the very same thing. Because Jesus told him this parable, told the expert in the law the parable of the Good Samaritan. You can read that too in Luke chapter 10, beginning with verse 25, to refresh your memory. But Jesus told the expert in the law the story of the Good Samaritan to show what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. And in this story, of course, the Samaritan helps an injured Jew recover from being robbed and left for dead along the roadside towards Jericho. When the expert in the law listened to this parable, he must ask himself what he observed in the parable about love. Well, what he saw was a man who, first of all, stopped on his journey, saw the man who was injured, and immediately began to care for his wounds. That's compassion, being moved by somebody's suffering and wanting to do something to alleviate that suffering. What he saw, too, was a man who used his own resources to help somebody in fulfilling their needs. So he poured in his own wine and oil into the man's wounds, bandaged them up, and even put him on his own donkey. That's humility, thinking about another person's needs before our own needs. He also had patience to continue caring for the man until he recovered. He was generous, beyond generous, because once he took the man to an inn, spent the whole day to take care of him, and when he, the Samaritan, had to continue his journey, he asked the innkeeper to continue caring for the man, and in fact gave the innkeeper money to take care of him and told him that if it cost anything more, he would come back and pay him. That's generosity, the unconditional generosity of love. He didn't expect anything in return. There was grace. He went way beyond what this man might have deserved. There was even forgiveness, because he, as a Samaritan, was a rival of the Jews. And to help a Jew, he would have to forgive the Jews of all the things they had done against the Samaritans to stop and help a member of that race. There was certainly kindness, because he helped this man's life be a lot easier by helping him recover. So Jesus was teaching, this is loving your neighbor. Jesus was the guide. He pointed out things in the story. And the man, the expert in the law, had to think about now what it meant to love his neighbor by showing compassion, humility, forgiveness, patience, kindness, generosity, mercy, grace, all of these expressions of love. We have to do the same thing for other teachings of Jesus. Take, for instance, the washing, when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. At the end of that scene where he washed their feet the night before he was tried and crucified, he told them, blessed is the one who does this. Does what? Wash feet? Well, of course they could wash each other's feet. But what Jesus had actually done, what the apostles had observed in his behavior towards them in washing their feet, is that he had humbled himself. He had lowered himself and done what was not his job to do. He served when it wasn't his place to serve, washing the disciples' feet. He is the Lord and Master washing their feet, the followers, the servants. So now they would understand the meaning of humility. They would have an image in their mind of what humility means. They would never, ever forget that image. And then they could show love and humility to others in the same way. So, one thing we need to do to discover practice is to understand what we're looking for and how to see things we'd never seen before. But we also have to see people differently. You know, one thing that we do in selfishness is we put people in boxes who offend us, who criticize us in some way, or who oppose us in some way, and say, this is the way they are. They're against me. And then we start to accumulate and remember experiences with them that confirm our opinion of them, the box that we put them in. And if we were to ever let them out of that box and assume they might be good people or worthy of love, it would be taking a risk. The risk would be that they would take advantage of us. But remember what we need to do to take the risk of loving unconditionally, allowing people out of their boxes and treating them as we would want to be treated. What we need to do is remember that we have a new perception of ourselves as children of God. God, by His grace, has made us His children. And He has loved us like we ought to love others. And with this knowledge, with this understanding that we are His children, and now our desire, our only desire, is to live a transformed life in His image and love like He loves. It doesn't matter what people might do to take advantage of us. We will continue to love. Not because people deserve to be loved necessarily, but because we want to be loved. We want to live in love like our Father is love. And so then, we take what Jesus taught and discover opportunities with people. And we can discover those opportunities with people now because we can open ourselves up to them and see them differently. Like the young man had to see his older brother differently. He had to look beyond his brother's anger and his criticism and his comments and see a person who needed to be loved and who needed to learn to love. And so that's what he did for his brother. He saw him differently because he saw himself differently now. He knew he was a child of his father, and he was trying to live like his father lived and love like his father loves. And his brother couldn't take that away from him by any comments or any bad treatment. So seeing ourselves the way God sees us frees us to love like He loves. Now what I would like you to do is think about somebody in your life that's difficult to love, maybe about whom you are accumulating experiences to confirm that this person is a hard person to love. Let go of those assumptions about that person and love them, ignoring the risk, and loving because you want to love like your Father loves. And what will happen is you will discover practice. You'll look at the teachings of Jesus. You realize what you're looking for and what to see that you've never seen before in this person, to love them like your Father loves them. May God bless you.